My name is Caitlin McConnell, and I am here with Roderick Epps and Laura Dees to conduct an oral history interview about the long-standing family reunion at Edwards Cemetery, which is celebrating its 125th year in 2024. We are at the Sardis General Baptist Church in rural Taney County, and the date is April 22nd, 2024. This interview is part of a project on death and funeral traditions in the Ozarks, and it's a collaboration between Ozarks Alive and Missouri State University Libraries. Thanks to both of you for letting me speak with you today.
Well, thank you for being interested.
Well, thank you. And if we just kind of want to start off, talking about your family, how did you get to Taney County in the first place? And then kind of tell me about how the cemetery began and when too, because I know that's older than the reunion tradition as well.
Yes. Well, we had several ancestors that came to Homestead in Missouri, but today we'll be talking about Thomas B. Edwards. Thomas was born in 1830 or 1831 in Ohio. By the 1850s, he was living in Illinois, and I believe in Mulberry. Illinois. In 1851, he married Frances Gooden, and the next record we have of him is being in the Civil War between 1861 and 1865 in the 7th Illinois Infantry. The next record we have of him is a census from 1870 that shows he is in Taney County. The next record we have is in 1878 when he donated property for the Edwards Cemetery. In 1879, he receives his homestead papers. And I believe you had to live on the property a minimum of 5 years before you could receive ownership. The cemetery was established in 1878, and I will now turn it over to you on how Thomas and Frances came to Taney County.
Well, what I have heard is when he got out of the Civil War, he went back home to Mulberry, and in a newspaper there, they had a printing of Taney County, a land of milk and honey. And he wrote it up, and he tried to get all of his family to move, which they didn't. But he came anyway. The paper said that they had all the squirrel, the rabbit, the deer, the turkey, the buffalo that you'd ever want to eat, and plenty of water, and a lot of rock. And at Mulberry, they said it is farming, it's a farming community, and when it rains, you don't get off the road, you're stuck. And they would have to go miles up there to get rock to haul in to build their roads. To get if they built off of a main road, that was quite an expense for them. And so when he got to Taney County, that problem was over. I do know this, his son, Thomas's son was Albert, and Albert had a boy by the name of Josiah, which was my grandpa. And my grandpa lived on 80 acres, and they lived off of the 80 acres. And they grew everything that they needed. If they didn't grow it, they traded. I got to share in all the farm work that they done. And I think I'm getting off the story.
No, that was fantastic. And I was going to ask too. You mentioned, I guess it was, so he's your great grandfather.
Thomas B. is our second great grandfather. Okay. He had 10 children. Albert is the third. He is our great grandfather. Our grandfather is Josiah Edwards. And I now live on his farm.
Wow.
And we are a century farm. And we have been recognized. And he acquired the property in 1901.
Wow. What farming do you do there now?
Cattle.
Yeah. That's really, really neat. I always love hearing about century farms. It's just such a special thing to be able to say that.
It's an honor to be able to, and actually my brother and I are the third owners.
Wow.
It went from Josiah, my parents purchased it, they lived next to it, and we recently lost our mother, and now it goes to my brother and myself.
Wow. Well, going back to when the cemetery was founded, when he deeded the land for that, obviously it varies a lot on how a cemetery starts. Do you know, was there just a need for it? Did somebody passed away and they needed a place to bury them, and that's what started it? Do we know?
Yes. His youngest son, Eddie, was born August 23rd, 1878. And he died July 25th, 1879. Now, the cemetery was established in 1878, so I would assume, but I do not know, that Eddie was probably ailing his entire life, not a healthy baby. Why he did it before Eddie died, I have no idea. But on the tombstone, it says that Eddie is the first person buried in the cemetery. And
let me put this in there. When he donated this land, he had homesteaded it.
160 acres.
Okay.
Yes. And this, where they put the cemetery, was the high point of that 160 acres,
Wow.
So that was how they determined where to put it.
Yes.
So that, well, to me it makes sense,
And 2 years later, roughly, I haven't checked the months, Thomas passed away and was buried there. I do not know if he was the second or if there were people in the time in between. Later, our great-grandfather, Thomas' son Albert, donated another acre to add to the cemetery.
How big is it at this point? Is it still the 2 acres or?
No, they've added to
Okay.
it. I went on the board in about
This is the cemetery
about
board.
1966, I think. And and I'm not on the board right now, but I've been off of it maybe 10 years, you know. But since the time that I went on it, all that time, my job was to plot the graves, and that's been a challenge over all them years. Not all good, but hey, very rewarding. We're family. You understand that, but hey, sometimes families they disagree, you know, and you got to take the good with the bad. But it is trying to get everybody. Hey, my mom, dad died here, and we want to be buried here. Well, hey, they may be right next to another family. You know, so a lot of compassion and a lot of love, because at that time they need it, you know. So it's been a really quite an experience for me, and it's taught me to respect my elders. You know, not only did I do that, but I cut the cemetery for 40 years, and we've had a lot of rocks, just rocks for a tombstone. And some of them stood up, flat rocks, and I didn't know this till later on in my life. Thomas B. Stone started falling over, and I mentioned it, and nobody was. I took it. I'm not going to go there. I took it upon myself to straighten that stone, and in digging, I dug one of these flat rocks out.
Oh no!
It was about 18, 20 inches long and foot wide, and it had in it, it was a cotton rock, and on one side of it, it had 15, the number 15 on it, and so I put that rock to the side, and my grandma, she had been the last one to keep the records, and when I got to look into them records, and it had Thomas B. was number 15.
Oh, okay.
That made sense, didn't it?
Sure. Sure.
And they was a bunch on that piece of paper that I remember seeing, which and they had their names labeled on who that there were.
In 1900, it was determined, or decided, I should say, that the local people that had someone buried there would like to celebrate their life. And so the idea of having a church service, a picnic on the ground, just to reminisce about those that had gone on. And that was the first cemetery meeting. And we, even through COVID, we have not missed for 100. This will be 125 years, and it's always held on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Roderick kept our grandmother's records. She was not the first secretary, but he kept the records that were destroyed in the tornado that hit Branson. But there were hundreds
Okay.
back in the day that would attend.
In 1906, the attendance. Now, at these graveyard meetings, they called it roll call. And if you was there last year, your name was read the next year, and then you signed up. In 1906, we're talking horse and buggy time, there were 601 people that was on that roll call.
And Roderick would help our grandfather get water for the cemetery meeting. I remember my father doing it, and now Roderick still does it to keep the tradition, but we have no electricity, no water. We have outhouses. What has changed since the beginning? Are we on our second pavilion?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we do have a cover. We have benches that would stay there year round. And we finally got smart, and we have 4 pieces of plywood that are suspended by chains, and that's where we put the food. It used to be a picnic lunch, and then it turned into a potluck at some point. And now the board buys fried chicken, because you just cannot have a church service meal without fried chicken. And we provide that, and then everyone brings a dish. I'll tell you what we do now, and then he can tell if it was different, because he's so much older than I am. We begin with prayer, singing. We have a different minister, usually. Sometimes they do more than 1 year. The last 2 years has been a cousin and a direct descendant of Thomas B. But we have congregational singing. We then have specials. We have the sermon. Then we move into a business meeting of anything that needs to be taken care of. And then we have a prayer to bless the dinner. And then you eat and walk around the cemetery. What some people might find objectionable is the small children running around. They sometimes crawl on top of the tombstones, but at the same time, it's giving them a sense of continuity and of generation after generation. And also, I think, a healthy view of death, that it's familiar to them.
So how many graves are there at this point, approximately? Do you have a ballpark of how many people are there?
You don't have a shame. I don't.
I believe on Find a Grave, we have right under 500. I think it's 450 to 500.
Okay.
And that's not counting, or maybe it is counting, but as he said, there might be a rock for a tombstone. Right. And the White River Valley Historical Society went to all the graves in cemeteries in Taney County, took pictures and cataloged and put that on Find a Grave. So I do know there were 2 people buried without markers.
Without markers.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
And probably more the marker.
And I have tried. I have tried to come up with these people. Let me tell you the story behind it. My grandpa told me. I think it was 29 or 33, 29 or 33, somewhere in that time, we had a flood. And at Blackwell Ferry, which you go to MM Highway, Mildred, and go on MM, you go down to Blackwell Ferry. They had 2 people that drowned during that flood. And them 2 people were colored people. And our cemetery took them in and buried them in our cemetery. I didn't grow up hating black people. I grew up respecting black people, and I would expect nothing more from my grandpa, which he wouldn't. And he told me, he said, now remember, they're buried there side by side. And I said, well, they don't have no stones up. And he said, well, we put rock. We put some rocks. Well, hey, rocks is gone. They started mowing. Rocks is gone. And I tried to find it in the newspaper. And he said, oh, everybody knew. Everybody knew about it. But them 2, we still don't have stones. And I had been on a campaign only myself in the 40 years that I cut. I cut around every rock, knowing that somebody was buried there, you know. It was, I wanted to do my very best, you know. These people, I know I didn't know them, but hey, they were very dear to me. Since we're
actually,
no, let me since we're talking about rock, I had a lady to come to me, and she said, I'm looking for my grandpa. And she said, this lady was Wanda Ehlers, and which was Wanda Pickett. She was a Pickett, which Picketts are kin to the Edwards. So anyway, Wanda, she said, I'm looking for John Spears, and said, I thought he was buried in your cemetery. And I said, Yes, he is. And she said, well, Roderick, she said, I've been over every inch of that. And I said, well, Wanda, I have too. You know, I said, I've cut it. But I said, that's not how I found out. I said, my grandpa told me. And she said, I want to meet with you as soon as I can to find that grave. And so we did. We met there on a Saturday morning, and I showed her this rock. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm sure. There was a bigger rock and then a smaller rock. The smaller rock was his wife. Okay? And
He was also a Civil War vet.
and I said, Wanda, the reason I know that this is true is my grandpa said that your grandpa, John Spears, was a minister. And this John Spears married my grandpa and grandma.
Wow.
And of course, she was quite a
Genealogist.
yes. But she knew everybody inside and out. But she went and they had a Civil War reenactment, I think is the way that you say. They come in and they perform the service, and very impressive. It was a unit from about 3 states that put it on, and dressed up, a cannon fired, muskets, the old, and they were dressed like Davy Crockett, you know, and then some of them had military uniforms on, that was Civil War uniform. And that was pretty good. Then later years they come in and they put up her tombstone there with him. But
Are people still being buried at the cemetery now, or is it pretty much full?
No, we have reservations.
Okay.
no, we purchased in about 1980, we purchased another 4 or 5 acres. And some of that we've started on. We've got a road that we've not got anybody past the road. So we've got quite a few spaces, but this is, we've got it in our bylaws that you gotta show kinship to the families. And actually they're saying to Thomas B. But we have families that are not related to us, but they have people buried there, and they let their families be buried there also. So
The Saturday before our meeting, we make sure the cemetery is has been mowed, and we have a cleanup, and usually it's Roderick, his son, his grandson, my brother. I just go and take pictures. We have other volunteers. They bring so we pick up trash and make sure everything is fine. We get a fire truck and we come in and wash the benches that have been stacked all year and set everything up so that we're ready to go the next day. And that's really fun. And there are people that have shown interest in, I have family buried here. I would be happy to help with that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the 600 figure from the early years. What kind of attendance do you have at this point?
Well, I'm sad to tell you that it's down. It would be closer to 100. You know, we've had short years, maybe 75, but it runs about 100 each year. Wish that there were more people that come, because number one, there are families.
Yes.
But they're scattered. Hey, they come from California, they come from Florida,
Texas.
I was cutting one time, and this guy come by and left me a check, and he said, I'm not going to be able to come this year, but he said, I'm going to do my very best. Said my grandson drove me from Florida up here, and that name is slipping me right now. I can't recall his name, but he left me a check for $1,000.
Wow.
And he said, told me, took me there and showed me his family, and he, this is one of them deals. He said, thank you for trimming around their stones so good, and I had took pains to, when I got done, they wouldn't have sprayed grass or around the stone, Well, hey, that weed eater does wonders, one of my first jobs that I ever had, going off course here, one of my first jobs, I cut the Branson Cemetery. And for the city of Branson, I worked for the city of Branson. I cut that cemetery.
Which our great-grandfather from the maternal side is there.
But when I trimmed it, I would have been, I'd have been about 12 years old when I done this. And when I trimmed that, I had a hand sickle, is what they furnished me to trim that. So a weed eater,
Makes it a lot easier.
a weed eater, I thought I had actually died and went to heaven when I got the weed
No pun
eater
intended.
and could buzz right around, and I can make all them graves look super, super nice, and I could just see the people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you.